did with him, which was 3 or 4 days ago in Delhi, he was only 45 minutes late, and the audience almost walked out. So, you should thank your lucky stars that you arrived just in time.
Talina Durrani going on half an hour late. Thank you.
Well, let me just say, about 25 years ago, which seems an awful long time, I got a phone call from London from this guy who sort of panic-stricken said to me, I've been told to write a story on Pakistan, and I have no idea anything about the politics of Pakistan. Can you possibly brief me? So I said, who the hell are you? And my language was slightly more, effusive than that. And he said, I'm William Dalrymple. And of course I said, yes, I will, because I had just read his first book, which was this travelogue called In Xanadu, which was, in my opinion, there were numerous books written about the Afghan war, which, as many of you know, I followed very closely and continue to do so. But out of all the travel books that were written on Afghanistan of the first war with the Soviet Union, Willie's was by far the most moving and the best. So, of course, since then we've been very good friends, and it's been wonderful to see him progress through all the travel books, the books about the Middle East, the Mughal histories, and now he seems to be coming down now to the 1830s, 1840s. Not to speak of the incredible book about Hinduism just before this. So this is a man with an enormous range, which is both historical and novelistic, and this book, I can tell you, which I've read, reads like a thriller. You will not be able to put it down, even though it's like all good predictable thrillers, you know the outcome, but you will really want to read this. So Willie, so this evening he's going to give you a presentation of the book, and then we're going to sit down and have a conversation. Willie, it's all yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I should just say thank you to Ahmed. I have been using Ahmed as a sort of oral source for every single story I've written about Pakistan for about 30 years now, and ripping him off unpaid. The only useful thing I ever did with him was to help him find a publisher for a little book called Taliban, which went on to sell how many million copies? 6 million or something. Anyway, like my entire output for 100 years, 10 times over. But anyway, it was good to do you a favour in return. So, what I'm going to talk about today is the greatest imperial catastrophe ever to be suffered by the British Empire. It was an extraordinary tale of, in a nutshell, an incredibly foolish attempt to attack Afghanistan by the British Raj. 18,000 men marched in, one man on the retreat made it out to Jalalabad. The rest of the army was completely destroyed, down to the last man. And this took place at the high point of British power in the entire history of Britain. Traditionally, British share of GDP of the world is about 7-8% in the Middle Ages. It grew to 50% nearly by the 1840s, and it's been in decline ever since, first with the rise of Germany, then with the rise of America. But this defeat, this complete destruction of an entire army down to just one man surviving, took place at a time when Britain was more powerful than it's ever been before or would ever be again. So the story opens. I'd like you to imagine yourselves out on the steppe between Meshed and Herat. Broken bandit country, disputed between these two, between Qajar Persia on one hand and the last remaining bastion of Durrani rule, of Saduzai rule, which was Herat. In the hot night of the summer of 1837. And a young British intelligence officer is trying to get to the Shah's camp near Meshed. But he's been on his horse for 2 days and a night. And because there's a war about to break out, all the post horses, the caravanserais have been taken, and he can't change his mount. So he's exhausted, the horse is exhausted, it's a hot night, and drooping off his saddle, he loses his way. Now, what is a British intelligence officer and an artillery officer doing in Persia in 1837? The answer is that there is a growing imperial competition between the two great land empires of the period. On one hand, Imperial Russia, which has been moving southwards and is now about to absorb the independent khanates and emirates of Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, and so on. And coming from the opposite direction, coming out of Calcutta, working its way northwards and westwards, the East India Company. The East India Company is something we take for granted in history, but an extraordinary organisation. It is a company. It has a board, it has a boardroom, it has shareholders, it publishes accounts, it has shares that go up and down in value, but it also has the largest standing army in Asia. And by the 1830s is one of the most aggressive imperial forces, while remaining, weirdly, a company that publishes accounts and has meetings and does all that kind of stuff. Think today, if there was to be equivalent today, Microsoft with fighter jets, or Pepsi-Cola with submarines. This would be the... And it's no more extraordinary than that. It isn't extraordinary. So this company, one Governor-General, Lord Wellesley, conquers more of India than Napoleon conquers of Europe. So this is an aggressive, powerful company sweeping north and westwards, the Russians coming down, and it's clear to anyone in a club in London or sitting in a war room of St. Petersburg that these two great empires are going to bang into each other and meet. And they're clearly going to meet in the unmapped territory of the Hindu Kush, somewhere up there in that territory that's now Afghanistan. But there is no map at this point. No one really knows in Europe what's there. There's no proper cartography of this area. A few travellers' accounts is all they have to go on. And the British decide to prop up the Persians, who've been attacked over and over again by the Russians. And the Rawlinson, the young intelligence officer, is sent in 1835 to help the Persians learn better artillery techniques so they can defeat the Russians in armies. So this British mission is, again, it's very resonant to the sort of thing we see today of the West sending in advisors to teach people to do puppet armies. It's something that we see a lot in the current war. But in 1837, Rawlinson's been there training up the Persians. And on this night, exhausted, he loses the road. And he disappears off into the desert. And he wakes up half asleep on his saddle and realizes he's completely lost. He doesn't know where he is. He's somewhere between these. There's two armies about to attack each other. It's anyway banded territory. It's not the kind of place you want to get lost at night. And he is screwed. And then dawn begins to break. The first light hits the top of the Shah Jahan mountains. And he can see coming towards him a cloud of dust. And the cloud of dust resolves itself into a large body of cavalry coming towards him. So he does what anyone would do. He's just got one groom with him. He backs off down a little side valley. And as the horsemen draw nearer, he expects they're Afghans or Persians or opium smugglers or brigands. They're none of those. It is Imperial Russian Cossack cavalry. And this man has happened to chance upon, by getting lost, it is the great intelligence scoop of his generation. It is what the CIA were looking for in Iraq. It was the yellow cake or the weapons of mass destruction. It is the piece of evidence which will allow, over the following 18 months, a group of right-wing, ideologically driven hawks to choose a war they don't need to fight. Because the sighting of Russians going into Afghanistan is the evidence that the warmongering party in Calcutta and London need to say that the Russians are going to take over Afghanistan. We've got to get there first. We've got to send an army into the field. And just look at the map, they say. If only we could take Afghanistan, if only we could have this territory, then the whole central of Asia will be ours. We can move from Persia to China, we can control the routes from Samarkand to Delhi, we can look down on Lahore, which at this point is at the height of Ranjit Singh's empire with the Khalsa. And then the British realised that they have a useful asset. Shah Shuja-ul-Mulk, can we have the lights down slightly? Shah Shuja-ul-Mulk, the grandson of Ahmad Shah Durrani, has been kicked out of Afghanistan, has lost the last remnants of the Amir Shah Durrani's empire at the age of only 25. And the British, realizing that he could be potentially a useful asset, have kept him on in Ludhiana, the nearest border post to Ranjit Singh's Sikh Punjab, and allow him to have his court and allow all this. 1837, he suddenly gets a visit and says, we're going to put you back on the throne. Now, this is not at all necessary with the British, because this is the Russian officer Vitkovich, who Rawlinson sees going into Afghanistan at the head of this Russian cavalry. This is the man who runs Afghanistan at this point. This is Amir Dost Mohammed sitting in the middle. And on the ground in Kabul, the British have another young intelligence agent called Alexander Burns, Bukhara Burns. And Burns is sending back all these messages to Calcutta, saying you don't need to do regime change. A little bit of negotiation with Dost Mohammed, and he will become a British ally. There's no need to take this guy, Shah Shuja, out of retirement to send an army. It's completely unnecessary. But because this guy is glamorous, oversexed, has published several bestsellers, he's irritated all his superiors. It's a classic case of departmental jealousy. The old men don't want to be told what to do by the glamorous young rising star. And Burns' messages are ignored. And by Ranjit Singh, initially this is meant to be a Sikh operation for British interests. The British think they can get the Sikhs to fight their war for them. So Macnaghten, the main British negotiator, arrives here in Lahore and negotiates with Ranjit Singh, saying, will you send your army into the Punjab to effect regime change for us? Ranjit Singh, brilliant tactician and strategist. Brilliant negotiator. At the end of 6-week negotiations, it's not a Sikh war in British interests, it becomes a British war in Sikh interests. And British are going to do Ranjit Singh's work for them, and it's going to be a British army that goes into the passes and gets rid of Dost Mohammed, who is Ranjit Singh's great enemy. So, this extraordinary, and there's a lot of familiar rhetoric, which we'll come back to when Ahmed and I talk about the parallels with the present and how this affects the current Afghanistan. But the kind of rhetoric that you're getting at this point sounds very familiar to all of us. Here's the British ambassador in Tehran in 1837, just before the war. We should declare that he who is not with us is against us. We must secure Afghanistan. Can you remember all that stuff in the papers about whether it was the occupying forces' duty to bring liberation to women, introduce Western democracy, introduce new forms of justice, or do you just pragmatically occupy a country? Well, this whole thing goes on again. Here is the British Chief Spy Master, Sir Claude Wade. There is nothing more to be dreaded or guarded against, I think, than the overweening confidence with which we are too often accustomed to regard the excellence of our own institutions, and the anxiety we display in introducing them in new and untried soils. Such interference will always lead to acrimonious disputes, if not a violent reaction. In other words, we don't do nation building. It's the kind of Rumsfeld argument. So, 1837, the army assembles in Ferozpur in the Punjab. And this is Victorian Britain at its most pompous and magnificent. 14,000 East India Company sepoys and 6,000 irregulars. The largest field force the East India Company will put to the field since the fall of Tipu Sultan in Seringapatam in 1799. 21,000 troops in all, 38,000 Indian camp followers, marching off to war on 30,000 camels. One brigadier needs 50 camels to carry his kit. The ranking British general needs 260. There are 30 camels reserved for the regimental wine cellar, and there are 7 camels that carry only cigars and cheroots. One regiment brings their own pack of foxhounds. And the man who runs this is a complete idiot. His name is Macnaghten. Poor Macnaghten should never have left the secretary's office, writes one of his deputies. He is ignorant of men, even to simplicity, and utterly incapable of forming and guiding administrative measures. The judicial line would probably have suited him best, and even then only in the Court of Appeal, judging only written evidence. So he's not much use. Sounds familiar again, yeah. And so off they go, and they go off. Here we have the army, all these soldiers heading off, and they've absolutely no idea where they're going. They're going off into the Kojak Pass, up through the sort of back of the Bolan, but there's no maps, and there's pictures of these guys just streaming over the mountains, vaguely hoping that Afghanistan will be the far side. They're wearing completely the wrong kit. The sepoys are sent off in thick winter uniforms, meant to keep them from getting cold in the middle of the UP winter. But it's the height of summer because they're delayed, and they all die of heat stroke. They don't know where the wells are. A quarter of the army dies without a single shot being fired. There's lots of Baluchi brigands, Ahmed's old mates, sniping from the hills. And having managed to mismanage this war, nevertheless, such is the surprise when this enormous army comes out the back end of the Bolan Pass that the warlords, the family ruling the Dost Muhammad's half-brothers, the Barakzai rulers of Kandahar flee without a shot being fired, and Dost Muhammad is able to go to his grandfather's mausoleum, which you can see in the top left of the picture, and get the barakat of his grandfather's blessing in the tomb. Oops, sorry, I should be going back. And now, British intelligence in the 1830s is every bit as wonderful as it is in 2012, and tells the army that there are no fortifications in Ghazni. So they leave the cannon behind in Kandahar and march off, only to find that there are a few fortifications in Ghazni. In fact, rather good ones. But they've got the wind up by this point, and they just blow down the front door, march in, and massacre everyone in there, and they only lose 10 soldiers. And so it is that within a year of setting off from Ferozpur, having despite lost so many of their soldiers from heat stroke and thirst, they get into the Bala Hissar and they replace Shah Shuja on the throne with hardly any losses. And it's a major coup. Again, rather like 2003. Afghanistan, against all advice, Afghanistan has been taken very easily with barely a shot being fired. And immediately the British begin, they think that it's such an easy conquest that the seeds of their future destruction are sowed immediately when they, rather than building some enormous fortification and arming themselves with cannon and hunkering down for the Afghan winter, they merely lay out their tents, as you can see in this slide, in the plain, overlooked from all sides by small hillocks. And in due course, some of the tents are replaced by barrack blocks, and there's a small wooden perimeter fence with a ditch put around it. But it is almost completely indefensible. Fantastically, idiotically stupid. Smug are they about their chances. All the Memsahibs are brought up from Simla. There's talk about moving the summer capital of the Raj from Simla to Kabul, like Shah Jahan, who would move either to Kashmir or to Afghanistan for the summer months. The British think they're going to do the same. And the Memsahibs arrive. Lady Sale, who's one of my great heroes in the book, who's much the most masculine Brit in the story. Lady Sale comes with her daughter, her grand piano, and her seeds from her Agra garden. And by the following spring, she's writing, "My sweet peas and geraniums were much admired. And in the kitchen garden, the potatoes especially thrive." There is horse racing and cricket and open-air amateur theatricals, and as winter draws in, sniper duck shooting, skating and snowman building. The foxhounds are taken out for hunting jackals. Burns throws a Christmas party with Scottish reels and bagpipes and presides over it all in Highland dress, complete with a kilt and an enormous sporran. So they're having a lovely time. And they think that they can do whatever they like. And they begin to reform, again, sounds familiar. The first thing they want to do is to make an Afghan national army, so that they can keep Shah Shuja in power. Shah Shuja is, I should just quickly say at this point, a Populzai. In other words, he's actually from the same tiny sub-tribe as President Karzai. Just to complete the sense of deja vu about this whole thing. So not President Karzai, Shah Shuja one gets muddled sometimes. Shah Shuja needs a new army, and so they start taking away land and estates from the old nobility. And this is a mistake because it pisses off the old nobility, who are up to this point happy enough to have their old king back as long as the British go home quickly enough. And had, again, another parallel with the present war, had the British merely gone in, installed their puppet ruler, started to create an army to keep him in power, and got out, it's possible that they would have been able to pull this one off. Instead, they stay around. The Afghans begin to think that by the time the Memsahibs have arrived, that it's an occupation which is going to stay, and then they begin to take over Shah Shuja's power, so it's quite clearly them ruling rather than Shah Shuja, and that very difficult balance which President Karzai has had to keep between being his own man and being a loyal ally to the people that put him in power is played out again in the following months. But the biggest mistake that they make is they get all overexcited about the Afghan women. Now, far be from me to comment on the pleasures and the delights of the women of this part of the world, but Shah Shuja's back, here's his family, here is Emir Dost Muhammad surrendering himself, but the British begin to turn Kabul into a brothel. There are 38,000 single men in a cantonment, and very, very soon there is a traffic in women in burqa being taken from the bazaar into the cantonment and coming back a little richer in the morning. And this outrages everyone's idea of honour. And combined with the fact that it looks as if the British are hunkering down for a long occupation, that they're taking the estates from the nobles and they're taking the powers away from the legitimate monarch, means that resistance soon gathers. And the final straw is when Alexander Burnes, he of the kilt and the sporran, sleeps with the girlfriend of the leading noble at Shah Shuja's, young noble at Shah Shuja's court, Abdullah Khan Achakzai. This is a mistake. It happened by God's will that a slave girl of Abdullah Khan Achakzai ran away from his house. Now this is the account of Mirza Atta Muhammad. One of the great joys of researching this book was discovering that there were, well, probably many more, but I discovered 9 full-length Afghan accounts of this war, which had never been used before in English, used by Afghan historians of Dari, but previously never made the language jump from Dari into English. And this is one of the best ones, Mirza Atta Muhammad's Nawe Ma'arak, the Song of Battles. It happened by God's will that a slave girl of Abdullah Khan Achakzai ran away from his house to the residence of Alexander Burnes. When on inquiry, it was found that that was where she had gone. The Khan, beside himself with fury, sent his attendant to fetch the silly girl back. But the Scotsman, swollen with pride, cursing and swearing, had the Khan's attendant severely beaten and thrown out of the house. The Khan then summoned the other Sardars and said, "Now we are justified in throwing off the English yoke. They stretch the hand of tyranny to dishonour private citizens great and small. Making love to a slave girl isn't worth the ritual bath that follows it." Good masculine Afghan stuff, good misogynistic. But here we go. But we have to put a stop to it right here, right now. Otherwise, and then this is my favourite sentence in the whole book, otherwise these English will ride the donkey of their desires into the field of stupidity. To the point of having us all arrested and deported into foreign imprisonment. I put my trust in God and raise the battle standard of our Prophet Muhammad and thus go to fight. If success rewards us, then it is as we wished. If we die in battle, then it is still better than to live with degradation and dishonour. The other noblemen, his childhood friends, tightened their belts and girt their loins and prepared for jihad. So first up for the job is Alexander Burnes. Alexander Burnes is, according to Mirza Atta Muhammad, almost certainly not true, but he says that he's enjoying a bath with 2 Memsahibs and Abdullah Khan Achakzai's mistress, soaking himself down in the talc of pleasure and the towels of enjoyment. I can't remember the exact phrase, but anyway, he's having a nice time inside when Abdullah Khan Achakzai and his men turn up at the gate. They kill his sepoys. He tries to get out the back door in Afghan dress, but he's cut down and killed. Henry Macnaghten, the guy who should have stayed in the secretary's office, goes out to negotiate, and he's shot dead by the negotiating team. Afghans don't mess around on these occasions. They haul the British cannon up onto the hills around the cantonment. You can see the barrack blocks at the bottom there, and they just begin shelling the cantonments. The British general in charge, Sir William Elphinstone, got his job only because he has the best grouse moors in Scotland, and the Governor-General wants to shoot on them. And he's also got a very good whisky still. But he is, by the stage that the uprising breaks out, he is so eaten up with gout that he can't even get onto his horse. Eventually he gets onto the horse, he falls off the horse the other side, the horse falls on him, and that's the end of him. Then, if they hadn't been stupid enough to put their cantonment on the valley floor and not defended it, even more stupidly, they put their stores, their ammunition and all the food they've got for the winter in 2 outlying forts, undefended except for a small party of 6 sepoys each, between the town and the cantonment. The Afghans capture these in the first 3 days. So by the end of the first week, the British are down to eating their foxhounds, which is the ultimate humiliation. Then they're down to eating rats. All the time they're being shelled by artillery, and by the end of a month, there's absolutely no alternative but for them to surrender. And what they managed to extract is a promise of safe passage through the passes. They're going to go to Jalalabad, they're going to then evacuate Jalalabad, down the Khyber and out. And they're allowed to bring their small arms, but not their artillery. And that's the best terms they can get. And so off they go, they pack up their palanquins, and into the passes, where this lot, the Ghilzai, had absolutely no intention whatsoever of honouring any of the promises made by all those guys in Kabul, the Duranis in Kabul. And so it is, on the 6th of January, 1842, and heavy, heavy snow, the worst Afghan winter for 30 years, the retreat begins in bright sun. 4,500 troops are left. 700 of them European, the rest of them company sepoys from Bihar and UP, who've never seen snow before and are more or less incapacitated by it. And 12,000 camp followers. 18,000 people leave the cantonment on the 6th of January. Here is the account of George Lawrence. At 9 a.m. the troops moved off, a crouching, drooping, dispirited army, so different from the smart, light-hearted body of men they appeared some time ago. The men sinking a foot deep with each step in the snow. My heart sunk within me under the conviction that we were a doomed force. Now, among the people on the march was my great-great-uncle, this man, Sir Colin Mackenzie. He wrote a very moving memoir about the retreat. He was one of the few survivors. And he described, I always remembered as one of the most heart-rending sights of that humiliating day, fixing my eyes by chance on a little Hindustani child, perfectly naked, sitting in the snow, with no mother or father near her. She was a beautiful little girl, about 2 years old, just strong enough to sit upright, with her little legs doubled underneath her, her hair curling in waving locks around her soft little throat, and her great black eyes dilated to twice their normal size, fixed on the armed men, the passing cavalry, and all the strange sights that met her gaze. Many other children, as young as innocent, I saw slain on the road, and the women with their long dark hair, wet with their own blood. The rearguard had to fight the whole way to the first night's camping ground at Bagrami, and pass through, literally, a continuous line of poor wretches, men, women and children, dead or dying from the cold and wounds, who, unable to move, entreated their comrades to kill them and put an end to their misery. So again, they make the same mistake they made already. They lose their stores. The cavalry go out first, followed by the infantry, and the baggage follows last. And of course, the Ghazis and the Jihadis fall on the baggage train and take it. So that the advanced troops, when they've arrived at Bagrami, are waiting for their dinner, they're waiting for the tents, and they don't come. And it gets colder and colder, and there's no food, and there's no cover. Now, the Afghans know exactly what to do, as they do today. When in winter warfare, the Mujahideen used to be completely unfazed, had exactly the right techniques for surviving in the winter. But in this condition, the Afghans who are with this army, the Jezailchis, who've been employed by the British, dig a circle in the snow. They put a fire in the middle, they light the fire, and then they fan out in a circle with their feet facing the fire, with their cloaks and all their blankets and everything all over them, and they keep themselves warm with their own body heat. It's not a very comfortable night, but they're okay. The poor Hindustanis haven't got a clue what to do in the snow. They just lie down on the snow, and they wake up, and they've got terrible frostbite. Their extremities, their feet and their hands look like charred logs of wood. And they can't fire their muskets, and they're completely incapacitated. In the first night, maybe a quarter of the army wakes up with frostbite. They are then herded like sheep by shepherds, by the Afghans at 6 in the morning into the Kabul Pass, where the Afghans prepared the mother of all ambushes. They have realized that the company muskets only fire about 300 yards, but they're Jazales, which are heavy and clumsy and difficult to load and old-fashioned. Their technology, 200 years old, the same sort of things you see Shah Jahan shooting deer with in miniatures. But nonetheless, they have a long range and they're accurate. And so they just sit at the top of the hills or halfway up, they build slit trenches, and they wait for the British to be herded in, and then they open fire. And the first thing the British realised here is this strange metallic ringing noise echoing off the empty snow peaks. A noise so unmistakable in its character that it can never be forgotten by those whose ears have once been startled by the unfamiliar sound. That's the noise of the Jazales being loaded. It's the ramrods going down the barrels. The British can't see anything. They can just hear this metallic noise. And then the firing begins. This is Lady Sale's account. She's at the front. The confusion was fearful. We had not proceeded half a mile when we were heavily fired upon. The pony Mrs. Sturt rode was wounded in the ear and the neck. I fortunately had only one ball in my arm. 3 others passed through my cloak near the shoulder without doing me injury. The pass completely choked up, and for a considerable period we were stationary under heavy fire. That night the sepoys and the camp followers, half frozen, tried to force their way not only into our tents but into our beds. Many poor wretches died around the tent that night. Many women and children were abducted. My great uncle gets taken hostage at that point, and he has to head back the following day through the scene of the previous day's ambush. This is his account. We came across many other bloody scenes. Sepoys and camp followers were being stripped and plundered on all sides, and such as refused to give up their money and valuables were instantly stabbed and cut down. On seeing us, the poor creatures cried out for help, many of them recognizing me by name, but what could we do? The Ghilzais had now tasted blood and clearly showed their tigerish nature, becoming very savage and fierce in their demeanour towards us, demanding that we should be given up to them for sacrifice, brandishing their long blood-stained knives in our faces and telling us to look upon the heaps of carcasses around us, as we should soon be among them. You came to Kabul for fruit, did you? They said. How'd you like it now? As we proceeded, we met numbers of the enemy's horse and foot returning to Kabul, laden with plunder on all sides. One miscreant had a little Indian girl seated on the horse behind him. The British officers are taken hostage. The sepoys who are captured are, if they are fit, they're taken off to the slave markets. If they are not, if they're frostbitten, they're just stripped of their clothes and driven into the snow. And the Afghans at this period have a very cruel thing with their slaves. They take a horsehair rope and they sew it through the clavicle of the slave and then attach it to the back of the saddle. So that if you don't keep up with your captor, your hands are tied behind your back, you'll have this rope through you, under your chest, under your chest bone. And if you don't keep up with your captor, your chest is ripped open. So it's a hideous, hideous thing. But a few of the sepoys somehow managed to escape capture and continue living as cannibals in the caves. First night, it's 18,000 people that leave Kabul. By the first night, there's only 10,000. By the end of the second night, there's only 10,000 that get out of the Kabul Pass. Of those, 6,000 more are frozen to death on the following night up at the top of the peak of the Tezin Pass. When they come down, the Ghilzai have prepared a holly hedge blocking the narrowest place in the path. There is a panic as dusk comes when they hit this. The cavalry trample what's left of the infantry. Only a few, about 200, make it beyond the Jagdalik holly hedge. Akbar Khan, Dost Muhammad's son, is directing the resistance. The following morning, the 200 that have made it beyond are from the 44th Regiment, 44th Foot, are exposed at dawn on top of the hill at Gundamuk. They fight to their last bullet, they then fight on with bayonets, then they're slaughtered to the last man, except one man, Captain Suter, who's wrapped the regimental flag around him, and someone thinks he's useful as a hostage. So he's taken hostage, everyone else is killed. 4 horsemen make it on to the Nimla Gardens near Jalalabad. There the gardeners invite them to share some bread and some dahi, and as they're eating their breakfast, the gardeners club them to death. One man makes it through to Jalalabad, Dr. Bryden. He only makes it through because wraps up in his hat a copy of Blackwood's magazine, which is the literary journal of its day, published in Edinburgh. And it's a hardback, and they take a swipe at it with the talwar, and it goes through the book, but it doesn't go through the skull. And he limps in. One man of an army makes it back to Jalalabad. Now, obviously, for the British, this is the most terrible tragedy, but for the Afghans, this is the beginning of a myth of national resistance, a story of nationalism, a story of resistance, which echoes today. When you go to Afghanistan today, everyone knows the names of Burns, McNaughton, long forgotten in Britain, are remembered in Afghanistan. And Mirza Atta, who'd originally started as a supporter of Shah Shuja, is thrilled. And within a year, the numbers have started being exaggerated. It is said that 60,000 English troops, half from Bengal, half from other provinces, without counting servants and camp followers, went to Afghanistan. Only a handful came back, wounded and destitute. The rest fell with neither grave nor shroud to cover them, and lay scattered in that land like rotting donkeys. For the English love gold and money so much that they cannot stop themselves from laying their hands on any area productive of wealth. But what prize did they find in Afghanistan? Except on one hand the exhausting of their treasury, and on the other the disgracing of their army. It is said that 40,000 English troops have been in Kabul, and many were taken captive en route. Others remained as cripples and beggars in Kabul, and the rest perished in the mountains, like a ship sunk without trace. For it is no easy thing to invade and occupy the kingdom of Khorasan. They hoped to establish themselves in Afghanistan to block any Russian advance. But for all the treasure they expended, for all the lives they sacrificed, the only result was ruin and disgrace. And if the English had been able to take and keep Afghanistan, would they have left this land where 44 different types of grape grow, and other fruit as well? Apples, pomegranates, pears, rhubarb, mulberries, sweet watermelon and muskmelon, apricots and peaches. Ah, and ice water. Ice water that cannot be found in all the plains of India. For these Indians know neither how to dress nor how to eat. God save me from the fire of their dal and their miserable chapatis. So that's Mirza Atta signing off on India. But what the British do next is that they send in their best general to lay waste to Afghanistan. The following spring, when the pass is open, the army of retribution appears. Every house in the way is de-roofed, every tree is barked, every field of crops is burnt, every village is destroyed. They come through, they rescue the hostages who are kept in Kabul. Lady Sale leads a sort of jailbreak of the prisoners with a gun in her hands. And then, as a parting gift to Afghanistan, they arrive at the Charchatta, the greatest bazaar in Central Asia, built by Shah Jahan, the same time as he was building the Taj, and they dynamite it. And out they march in Afghanistan, leaving waste behind them. And that's meant to be their honour saved. I thought I couldn't do this book without going on the route of the retreat. Today, though, the end of it backs onto the place where the last stand took place, at Gundabuk, this hill, backs onto Tora Bora. So two last stands in the same place. And it's now Taliban heartland. So but I had a lucky break. Last Mughal had been read by Amrullah Saleh, who was Karzai's security chief, and he sort of hauled me in on my second day in Kabul when I went to research this, and sort of gave me a kind of literary critique, saying that I had insufficiently patriotic, that I hadn't done this, hadn't done that, but I'd better do a better job this time. He then put me in touch with a man called Anwar Khan Jigdalik, who's a former Hezbi Islami commander from Jigdalik, whose lands were on the route to the retreat, just 5 or 10 miles, a bit 20 miles from Gandamak. And so we set off out of Kabul, passing the site of the British cantonment of 1839, which inevitably is now the ISAF barracks and the American embassy. We went up through the Kabul, up the Tezin Pass in this old pickup. And on the way, I said, do you see any parallel between these two wars? He said it's exactly the same. Both times the foreigners have come here for their own interests, not for ours. They say we are your friends, but they are lying. Whoever comes to Afghanistan, even now, they will face the fate of Burns and McNaughton. This, incidentally, hasn't stopped Anwar Khan Jagdalik from sending off his children to London for a good education. But we know all that. So we get to Jagdalik, and there, being Afghans, they lay on the most fantastic feast for this great hero of theirs. And kebabs are cooked, and mulberry pulao is presented, and tent flaps of naan is laid out. And this goes on and on and on. As anyone who's been to an Afghan feast will know, the food just keeps on coming. And it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We clearly weren't going to get to Gandamak. We'd just eaten too much, and it was too late, and the day was ending. So we were forced to go back to Jalalabad by the main road via Sarobi, and never got to Gandamak. But we arrived in Jalalabad to find that we'd actually had a very lucky save, because that very day they had sent out the police to burn the poppy crop, the opium poppies, in Gandamak. And villagers got the Taliban in to help them. 9 police vehicles were blown up, 100 people taken hostages, 3 people killed. So had we turned up with all our guards at 5 in the afternoon, we almost said, I wouldn't be sitting here chatting to you today. But the following day, the elders of Gandamak came in to Jalalabad to negotiate. They had hostages. And so I sat with Anwar Khan watching this jirga as the Predator drones took off from the airport in Jalalabad, which is one of the main Predator centres, one of the main drone bases, these very sinister-looking things. And films, it's always one of them taking off at a time, but in Jalalabad it's like a kind of London taxi rank. It's these things every minute going off. And at the end, we went up to the elders of Gandamak and talked to them. And they said, since the British went, we've had the Russians. We saw them off too, but not before they bombed many of the houses in the village. We are the roof of the world. From here you can control and watch everywhere. Afghanistan is like a crossroads for every nation that comes to power. But we do not have the power to control our own destiny. Our fate is determined by our neighbours. In truth, all the Americans here know their game is over. It's just their politicians who deny it. This is the last days of the Americans, said Jagdalik. Next, it will be China.